So welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're focused on DevOps strategies for a modernized cloud environment. And this is a joint session between ClearMeasure, a leading consultancy in North America, as well as Octopus Deploy, a continuous delivery DevOps product. So first, hello from ClearMeasure and Octopus. First of all, we'll do some quick introductions. Jeffrey, did you want to go first and introduce yourself?
Oh, my pleasure, and it's great to be with you, Rob. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, and I've been a programmer since 1997, and I am part of ClearMeasure, and we're a software consulting firm focused on mission-critical software projects, as well as third-party inspections and advisement and project turnarounds, and we do a ton of work with Octopus Deploy. I will say, when it comes to automating deployments of software, any kind of software, Octopus Deploy can handle everything. There's other products that can handle simple situations, but you kind of hit a brick wall when you get to the more complex scenarios. Not so with Octopus. I mean, you really can deploy anything to anywhere, any way you need it, and we consider the absolute best of breed product when you're going to be doing automated software deployments.
That's excellent. Thanks, Jeffrey. And my name is Rob Pearson, and I'm a principal solutions engineer at Octopus Deploy. I've been a developer for over 20 years, and I joined Octopus almost 9 years ago. So I joined as a software developer where I was helping build the product, and I've shifted through a few other teams through to our solutions engineering team, where I still get to work with great customers and our partners. And that's a good way to mention that Octopus and ClearMeasure have a partnership where they're one of our really most trusted and highly skilled partners around the world, with some of the most experience working with Octopus. And we highly recommend them for a lot of the complex projects involving Octopus and other technologies to help out and help companies get started and accelerate. So yeah, it's great to be here, and it's wonderful to be on this session today with Jeffrey.
And I glanced at our attendee list. We've got a really great crowd today, so I'm excited.
Oh, this is I hadn't been looking up. That is great. We have a lot of people who have joined. So yeah, welcome everyone, and we'll get started. So what are we going to talk about today? We have 5 main points, and then we are going to have time for questions. First, we're going to kick off and we're introduce the context and domain. What are we going to talk about with modernized cloud environments? Then we're going to talk about some of the challenges once we have that understanding. So there's teams around the world who are working in this space, and some of it is very hard. There's pain points, so we'll dig into that. And once we've kind of covered that ground, we're going to shift to talk about how to establish a DevOps architecture, and that's leading into setting yourself up for success. And then we'll talk about strategies, deployment strategies to tackle those pain points and build upon that DevOps architecture. And then kind of the final point that we're going to talk about, we're going to jump into a demo where we can see how everything works, and we can talk about or see this in action, and finally answer any questions. So with that, let's kick off. So first, our context in domain, and probably the most immediate question is, what is a modernized cloud environment? And so if you think about the evolution of the industry, if you've been around for a little while, everything started with physical servers, where companies had physical servers, racks of servers, where they ran everything on-prem. And then sometimes that shifted to data centers or co-location data centers, where they had racks and racks of servers. And that shifted to when virtualization was introduced. And again, all of this is still on-prem, where they've got all their technology, all their compute, either on the same location as their offices or parallel in data centers, etc. But then the public cloud appeared with AWS and now Azure and Google Cloud, the major cloud providers, as well as the smaller ones that are available around the world. And so what we now have is a lot of companies, especially the larger ones, have a mix of on-prem. They still have on-prem technology, typically virtualized, not as much physical servers anymore, but combined with cloud compute of some sort. And so you have a mix of these compute technologies in different locations. And in the even more recently, we have edge computing, whereby companies, organizations that have different physical locations, it could be retail stores, it could just be businesses around North America or the world, and they're servers that sit in these different separate offices or different locations. Example could be a retail restaurant that has a server and could be running a Kubernetes cluster, powers the point of sale, order management, and things like that. So we really live in a very modern environment with a range of infrastructure. And so with that infrastructure, you think about what are the types of applications we're running. And I highlight here brownfield versus greenfield. And if you're a developer and you've been around for a while, greenfield projects were often a lot more fun because you're making all the decisions up front. You don't have any history on the project. You get to pick the infrastructure, the tech stack, and you make all those decisions and iterate as you move forward. But the reality is there's a lot of brownfield applications still out there. And brownfield applications are existing applications, often business critical, that have decisions that were made in the past and a lot of good ones, but there's also often a lot of tech debt where there's bad ones or where decisions were rushed, or we just made mistakes and we learned lessons, but you still have to live with them and you don't have time to go back and fix them. And so brownfield applications often are still running on-prem or a mix, and where they're running on virtual machines, monoliths, different architectures, and they are the candidates for app modernization. Even a broader organizations are now entering into IT transformations. We hear that from a lot of our customers where they're all embarking on IT transformations, even now in 2024, where they're still taking some of the infrastructure and doing lifts and shifts to public cloud or various other projects. But they're trying to make those older systems more maintainable, more flexible, and allow themselves to move forward and innovate.
Rob, I want to touch on the brownfield and greenfield analogy, just for people that aren't familiar with why that matters. In every greenfield project, you start it fresh, it can become a brownfield project in just a few months if the right things are not done in order to keep quality high and keep the software stable in production as being deployed. And brownfield systems can be made green again. It's all about flexibility. And the analogy, a green field, when you have a green field, a green pasture, you have a lot of flexibility with ranching. You can have any kind of number of animals on there. But when you have a brown field, the grass is not as lush. You don't have as much flexibility. Yeah, you may have some goats on there or fewer cows per acre, but you can use the field. You just don't have as much flexibility. But if you can change the nature of your field and make it green again, well, now your flexibility goes up. So if you can fix the environment of your software system, now you have more flexibility. And so just starting, I want to start something new, therefore it's greenfield. Well, if you don't have the right practices, it's just going to turn brown in a few months.
That is a great observation. And I think we probably all have been on projects like that, where you do start out full of hope and you're looking forward to it. But without the right foundation, you can very, very quickly get in bad shape and have bad decisions to live with. So it's always good to keep that in mind and even move forward with the brownfield, with the existing applications, and improve them and increase that flexibility. That's a great point. Oops. So now let's continue on and talk about the challenges in this world in a modernized cloud environment. And from the last point, I think one of the keys of a modernized cloud environment, it's that mix of old and new applications and infrastructure. So even if you have a modernized front end or various components, you often have to live with older infrastructure or legacy services. And there's a mix. It's a mix of old and new technologies. And so the pain points in this environment, often they can be very hard to change and scary to deploy. But why is that? I think a lot of it has to do with the more complex systems have higher cognitive load, and it's just a more complex solution. So to be able to understand how to change it, often the older systems, they have one person who has worked on it for years. They are the expert. But when those people leave, you need to understand how to change it. What are the implications of changes and so on. But when it's older and there's more technologies involved from the back end, from the database, from the front end, even with a modern full stack application, it's harder to stay across things. And so when these things get hard to change and scary to deploy, the natural thing is to deploy less often. And that can reduce the frequency of the pain, but it often compounds. So instead of deploying, say, once a week or even once a month, it can shift to once a quarter or once every 6 months, twice a year. And when you're doing that, the small change sets grow and the complexity of release goes up and up and up. And so what that often leads to is failures, deployment failures, even incidents and outages. And it just reinforces that pain, whereby when it breaks, well, then we're not doing that again. We have to be more careful, but it doesn't get better. And so these are key pain points working in this modernized cloud in modernized cloud environments.
Yeah, one thing I'd add is the all the great new cloud offerings. It's not just about getting your code to run in that environment from a runtime perspective. It's also configuring all the knobs and buttons that they have available. And I've seen plenty of times where the copying of the code is automated, but not all of the configuration. And then when a configuration setting needs to change, oh, well, now we have a few manual steps in there. And then therefore we have a mix of automated and manual, and that doesn't accomplish the goal. And then the complexity of the additional knobs by going to the cloud, well, it actually doesn't solve any problem because we didn't choose the right automation architecture. So it's great, but there's some things we got to watch out for.
I completely agree. And I think to your point, Kubernetes is this amazing platform for building scalable, resilient applications. But in terms of being a flexible platform, it is it's the highest degree. And so all of those key points, how it's configured and all of that feeds into the complexity and challenges of working in one of these environments. So now I'd like to talk about cloud smart versus cloud first. And so this is a topic where when the public cloud was really gaining popularity and organizations were doing lift and shifts and just moving it very broadly, anything they touched or a new project, they were shifting to the cloud. But again, pain points that wasn't always the best strategy. Because nowadays, especially in today's economy, no organizations, companies, they can't stop all work and rewrite their applications. When you're thinking about a brownfield application, and almost everyone that I worked on was business critical. It powered the business, and a lot of these systems power the world that we live in. But you can't just stop everything, just park that and do a rewrite, because that takes too much time and nobody has that ability. So to be able to modernize something, it's all about priorities and strategy. And so setting yourself up for success, and this kind of ties back to the brownfield and greenfield, where a greenfield project could go turn into a brownfield one if you don't have the right architecture. And so here I mention an evolutionary architecture where you try and start right, set yourself up for success, and then iterate and avoid past mistakes. And so it's about understanding what's your current state, but also where do you want to go? What is that future state? And then it's all about that strategy and the priority of what you want to update. Sometimes that could be smaller components to test out certain new technologies or approaches, but other times it's for a large complex system and you want to modernize or update it. It's the one that you want to be able to innovate with. It's the one that needs attention. It's public facing, or it's critical, or it's used by a large group of your customers or users, and you need to improve it and improve it quickly. And so that's where the priority can come in. And so instead of being cloud first or going broad, we're just going to, anytime we touch something, we're going to move it to the cloud. It could be, what are the right areas that we need to move to the cloud to get benefit for our customers, to be able to ship, iterate, etc.
Yeah.
And so with that, Jeffrey.
Yeah. So now in the shifting of, okay, here's the problem, here's what we're dealing with, here's the context, here's the difficult points, here's stuff to think about, all the ways that it's hard. Yeah, there's a lot going on. That's why not everybody's doing it well instantaneously, and it's kind of a journey for the industry. Let's talk about the parts of the solution. And before we get to talking about product features, which Octopus Deploy, again, I mentioned it's best of breed, and in my opinion, it's the absolute best product for covering all the needs for deploying anything to anywhere. But let's back up and let's talk about architecture. Architecture is conceptual in nature, and again, for simple scenarios, you know what? There's other products where they can deploy simple things and they work fine. All right, but your architecture needs to be scalable, not just for simple things, but it needs to account for your actual mission critical software systems, which are not just going to be a website and a database. They're going to have lots of things going on. They're going to have back-end jobs moving data. They're going to have durable storage queues. They're going to have complex caches. A lot of people, use Redis and the like. There's going to be a dozen different places to store data, not just SQL Server. So real mission critical software systems have a lot of different types of processes that are coordinating together, and they're complex. But we can simplify that complexity by categorizing all of the piece parts and coming up with categories. And once we understand the categories of things that need to happen, then we can do a set of simple tasks, put together our completely automated DevOps environment, and the whole becomes simpler. So let me talk about the absolute necessary pieces of a complete DevOps environment. And we have to start a little bit before the automated deployment, just because there's prerequisites. And there's an analogy that is a common term in the industry called a DevOps pipeline. And that's really a good analogy because a pipeline invokes the idea of water. And it evokes the idea of flow and flow in one direction. And so let me start with where everything starts, so that we can get to this list. And that is your Git repository, your source control, your version control system. Everything stems from that. That is the headwaters of your pipeline. Everything flows from your source code. And I want to just run an aside, not really on topic for this webinar, but don't accidentally put multiple applications in the same Git repository, because every pattern, every product out there in the market is really designed to operate on the contents of one Git repository. And so if you have lots of different applications in a single Git repository with lots of teams, you're just going to be fighting it. So once you have that, the first step in your DevOps environment is your private build. The second step is your integration build, and then the third stage of continuous integration is your first test deployment. Let me talk about those as a group. And if you've never read the book written back in 2006, the title of the book was literally Continuous Integration, and it was the book published by Addison Wesley Publishers, and it was the book that defined continuous integration as a pattern, and that stood to this day. But some of the build servers, the getting started hello world sample is just point to a Git repository and then let it compile your code based on a trigger. Well, that needs to happen, but that is not alone continuous integration. Continuous integration is a three-phase pattern where we start with a private build on our local environment, then an integration build at the team level, and then that the end of the integration build, we need to package up a release candidate so that we can do a first test deployment. Continuous integration isn't in place until you're actually deploying your build to something to make sure that that program still starts up. Okay. Then after that, then we can move into the actual automated deployment across environments on the way to production. And we need to create environments. We need to automate every step of everything that needs to be deployed. After we deploy, we need to do some type of smoke test to make sure that the deploying of that process, that it actually happened, that process actually started up and wasn't misconfigured in some way. And then after that, one critical element that needs to be in our DevOps architecture is full system tests of some sort in a fully deployed, properly configured environment that is the same shape as production. Doesn't have to be the same scale or the same size as production, but architecturally it needs to be the same shape as production. And then across all of our environments, production being the most important, we need monitoring and our observability capabilities to be configured. Open telemetry is gaining steam, which is fantastic in the industry, but we need to configure those things and have some tests as well. So these are the absolute table stakes to come to the table with DevOps, and the architecture of your overall development environment for your team needs to have these capabilities at a minimum. And the next couple slides kind of show how they relate to each other. And we're going to show two versions. And this first version shows a slightly different tool mix. It shows NuGet as our package manager. It shows TeamCity as our build server, and it shows Octopus Deploy as our deployment server, and it shows Bitbucket as a Git host. So you can put different tools together, but architecturally it's the same. And I understand the text is really small. That's not the point. By the way, if anyone's interested in a high resolution PDF of these architectural diagrams that we're showing, these are part of some larger posters that are really meant for print shop. They're really high resolution when you get them. If you want copies of those, just put it in the chat and we can get those to you. But I just want to breeze through the relationship between these things. We start with the private build on the local workstation, and then we do the integration build in TeamCity, and then in NuGet, we store the release candidate packages, whether it's NuGet packages for a few compute components, and then you have your migration project for SQL Server, or whether you've gone containers and you need to push them to an Azure Container Registry. But either way, you end up with something that is deployable and deployable artifacts. Now we get to a series of environments, and there are three distinct types of environments, and you need at least one of each. Okay. Now, many teams have much more than just three, but there's three canonical types. The first one is production. We all understand that. Our customers use it. You need at least one production environment. And in some cases, you'll have multiple production environments. If you stand them up for different customers or for different regions, you need at least one. Backing off from production, we need some type of environment where a human can check something manually. Okay. And examples of this is a product management test environment, a UAT, user acceptance test environment, a staging environment, any number of things, but it's an environment where we're going to use it to test something and it has a certain audience, but that's a category of environment. Pull back from that, the other category of environment is an automated test environment or a test automation environment, and you need at least one of those. And so in your case, you may have multiple of each, but again, there are three canonical types of environments when you're deploying in your progression in your pipeline all along the way to production. And make sure that you have at least one environment where you can run completely automated test suites against a fully deployed instance of your entire system, and then an environment where people can check things out, and then of course your production environment. Let's go to the next slide, because it's the same DevOps architecture, but just with a little bit different tool mix, just to illustrate that the concepts really are the same. The shape of the DevOps environment has really become industry standard, and there's a lot of agreement on this throughout the industry. So this mix of tools uses Azure repos for the Git hosting, Azure pipelines for the build server, and the internal Azure pipelines package management, and Octopus Deploy for deployment. And it also uses Redgate's SQL change automation for deploying of the SQL Server changes, and some SQL mask and SQL clone. Redgate, provides some really good products as well for complex databases. But the shape of the DevOps environment is the same. We go through the same progression. And what's really important here, one of the mistakes that some people make is accidentally going back to the code when it's time to deploy to another environment. There's one rule of thumb. You want to build once and deploy many. You don't want to recompile your code and repackage your code just to deploy to the next environment. Our integration build has already created our release candidate artifacts, whatever that may be, appropriate to your application architecture. We already have those. We already know what build, 5.300. whatever means. And so we can take that exact same set of release candidate artifacts and deploy it to however many environments we have all the way to production. So it really is a linear fashion. We don't ever have to go back to source code to compile something new in order to deploy to the next environment. That's a really important rule of thumb. And we can go to the final slide on this.
Oops, there we go.
All right. Now, it's easy to talk about cloud in the form of just in the terms of Azure App Service or Container Service or SQL Server, and everything's server side, everything's cloud native. But we've had an explosion over the last decade in software programs that run on your handheld computer, your phone, your Android, your iOS, and also an explosion on programs that run on mini computers out there in a factory, the IoT revolution, and even retail locations that just have a small computer that is in every location. You have tons of deployment destinations, and architecturally, it's the same concept, okay? And so in this example, we have some additional environments that we're deploying to, whereas you can see under the Octopus logos, we are deploying an app to the Google Play Store. We're also deploying to the Apple iOS store, and we're also deploying some things to Azure. And guess what? To keep that same example of our test automation environment, our manual test environment, and our production environment, well, yeah, we're gonna have a test automation version pushed to Google Play and to the Apple Store. Anyone who's done that knows that the Test Flight app for providing test environments for iOS apps, and then for production, guess what? Now we have our production submission to the Apple Store, our production submission to the Google Play Store, and there's command lines for pushing to those, just like everything else. And again, with Octopus, you never hit a brick wall. You can deploy any type of software to any environment exactly the way that we need it to happen. But architecturally, there's a finite set of distinct concepts. And so again, if our environment includes some part of the software, some bit of the code that needs to go to the Android store, that needs to go to Azure, that needs to go anywhere, that needs to go to an IoT device, that's fine. That's the shape of what it means to be our production environment. And then we needed one of those for manual testing purposes and one of those for test automation purposes. But architecturally, those are the concepts. So I know that's a lot, Rob, but I get excited about this stuff.
No, I think that's fantastic, and I think the key here, like it's interesting because if you think about the last three slides, the architecture is consistent, and I think that's one of the keys is that when you're tackling, when you're working in a modern cloud environment and you're trying to modernize, you're trying to improve one of these existing applications, having this foundation helps so much, and it's interesting because the types or the categories of environments I've seen companies around the world have, they can have more than three, they can have five, they can have six, multiple UAT. They have different ones for different purposes, but they all fit those same categories. And like it's that dev playground where it's integration, it's the automated test suite, and then so on, that environment for people to play with through to production. And again, we all we all know production, but it's that progression through the environments and the supporting component in a pipeline to get to that point that's important. So I know there was a lot you talked about a lot, but I think that it's very, very strong and compelling, and that's the foundation that can help you set you up for success.
Yeah, yeah.
So if I just go to progress now, and this is when we're going to talk more about some of the strategies. And so the interesting thing, again, this builds upon that architectural foundation. And so how do you get started? So if you're working at a company and you've got a mix of old and new, but you're on an application, probably business critical, one or more teams, and it's older technologies, it could be considered legacy, it's a monolith, you're deploying to virtual machines, lots of older things, and you want to modernize. How can you do that? So one of the key strategy here is, again, it's thinking about your current state and the future state. So the first point here that we have is where get together with your team and ideally cross-functional. So you have some, if you're in a organization that is cross-functional teams, or you have dev and ops represented, but get everybody together and build a shared vision of where you want to go. And that's not just the application, like the application teams, that's good. You can align with the rest of your team or multiple teams, but it's also the infrastructure. Where do you want to go? What's the type of system, and what's the future state that you want to build? What is that shared vision? And so once you've established that, it's kind of, that's the direction of where everybody's going to be moving. And again, it's not going to happen overnight. It's one of these things where you can't stop everything and then rewrite everything and move toward, like, go straight to the shared vision. It can happen incrementally. And so the second point there is start in the middle. And so when you think about the architecture diagram that we were just looking at, if you don't have that, and you might have a CI build, but how can you get started? One is get started with a simple CI and deployment. And that's typically an area where the audience is all the same, where it's, again, if you have if you're a cross-functional team, you're all in the same team. But often starting with CI and a basic deployment is something that the dev team can control. So you're starting, you're improving your life. You've got CI, you can run automated tests, and a basic deployment. You're getting started and you're moving on the path to that DevOps architecture. But once you have that foundation, it's working well. You can see you've got your automated build. You can see green. You can see the path to production. That's a wonderful foundation. But then it's time to expand left and right to mature your solution. So what that can mean when you expand left, it's more of those elements that Jeffrey was talking about. The private CI build, and then the other elements that we just saw to produce that release artifact. And so you're improving and maturing to the left, but then you can also move to the right, where again, it's the additional environments, ensuring you have them. And if you don't, those are a great candidate to take advantage of technologies to provision your infrastructure. Could be Terraform, it could be Bicep, it could be CloudFormation, it could be a range of technologies. But it's a way to start establishing those other environments, like a dev environment, then like a test or UAT staging environment. And then production, we always have production, but if you have gaps in that environment progression, that's the other side that you can build. So you're building that shared vision. You're getting started. You're starting in the middle. You're starting simple, but then you're building upon that foundation. And so by the time you've kind of hit point 3, you have a broader foundation of that DevOps architecture. And so then once you have that, thinking about the app modernization, how can you do that? And again, it's prioritized changes. It's cloud smart. Again, it's picking those areas that are a priority, where if we need to iterate and innovate in a certain area, we need to move fast. That's the priority, to move to the cloud. And again, iterate. You can't tackle everything at once, but prioritize and just start doing it, and then learn and iterate.
Rob, do you mind if I tell a story?
Please do.
I'm thinking back, and all the things you're talking about. I've been programming for 27 years now, and so I remember before the even notion of continuous integration, and what it was before we had continuous integration. I remember what it was before we even had the ability to do an automated deploy of any kind very easily at all without Herculean efforts. And so I kind of went through this progression in my career very slowly as the industry evolved, but it's kind of this, even now where everything's available, it's the same progression that we're going to go through, that every team is going to go through. If there is no integration build whatsoever, then a team currently is struggling where developer A pushes in some code, developer B is also pushing in some code, developer C gets the code, and it won't even compile. It literally won't even compile because we're stepping on each other, and there's no real-time quick check that we didn't break each other because we're all making changes to code that's referencing each other. So at its base, just by grabbing one of the build servers and auto triggering a compile, that at its base, at least you get real-time checking that you didn't break the ability to compile the code. And that's pretty quick to get. And so even without any automated tests, you get that. And I remember when we didn't have that, and literally there was this guy named Jason. It's like, Jason, you broke the compile again. What did you do? But so continuous integration, that's kind of in the middle. And then the first deploy, before trying to do anything else, before trying to put in static code analysis or add in test projects that have never existed, if we can just figure out what it means to deploy this application, and not to production, because that's going to be, if you've been rocking and rolling with manual deployments to test environments and to production, and you've got this one guy who knows exactly how to put everything in the right place in the environment, then that's not where you start. That's the hardest thing that you can do. But chances are, if we're in that environment, we also don't have a dedicated environment that can be used for test automation. So we create a net new environment that's never existed before, or even if we're on VMs or dedicated Windows, and there's always ways to multiplex a test server. IIS, you can put any number of web applications on an IIS server and just call it a different environment. Same thing with the database server. You can just put a different database and name it with the environment name. You can multiplex a single database server as multiple environments. That's not hard to do from an infrastructure perspective. But what's important is that you have logically that test automation environment, and now that is your target for your first deploy, and figuring out what it means to deploy each runtime process of your application architecture. And so that's in the middle, your very simple version of an integration build, just that second step of the continuous integration pattern, and then the third step of the continuous integration pattern, which is that first development team audience deployment. And once you have that, your internal customers, product management, whoever it is, they're going to start seeing changes because they're used to having a internal test environment be the environment where bugs are found. In those types of environments, that's just where you find bugs, right? And once you have a development team focused deployment environment, well, the bugs where you said, hey, there's a new build ready on the test server, go and check it out. And they go to the first screen and it blows up in their face spectacularly. And they say, well, this build doesn't even work. That's the first thing that will go away. It'll totally be eliminated because you'll never deploy a totally broken build to the manual test environment because you'll already know that it was broken because you deployed it to the test automation environment. So that's the first thing that they'll notice. And then because you'll start to add one, full system test that just, exercises through the system, and then another one, and then another one, they're going to notice that fewer bugs are present in the manual test environment. And then they'll start to ask, oh, what's changed? Oh, how's it going? Oh, you're doing a deployment to this environment. And then you won't even have to push them. Whoever is the users of that manual test environment, they're going to ask, hey, can you deploy a build to our environment faster? You're automatically deploying it to your environment. Can you automatically deploy it to our environment? And then you organically take that next step and you expand. At the same time, you also add more unit tests and component level integration tests. And that's how you're expanding to the left and the right. And then you decide the right time to add some static analysis rules to your integration build. And so you go at the natural pace. Don't force it. You'll go at the natural pace, and you'll know when those times are.
Absolutely. I think that is a great way to kind of cover that. And again, it's getting started and then continuing and growing from there. And it's a wonderful story. So with that, so just a couple other quick points here before we jump into a demo. The one thing when you're embarking on a lot of these things, it's one key point is to measure what matters. And so it's having some idea, again, if you're working towards that shared vision, what's your current state and where are you moving to? So again, often it helps with management to be able to say, hey, we've made these steps and these improvements. And then you can actually show concrete results. The door metrics are great, where it's talking about deployment frequency, lead time, and even on stability, where it's how many deployment failures you have and or mean time to recovery. So capturing some statistics, measuring the improvement, because that often will help you be able to do this and expand and continue it. And so really very much building upon what Jeffrey was just talking about. But again, automating everything as you progress, it can improve your testing and quality. Developer productivity, that's a huge point nowadays. Again, when the economy is tough, being productive and having your team shipping software, shipping changes and doing well is a very positive thing. And again, leveraging pipelines as code, that could be provisioning infrastructure if you're building a new dev environment, through to config as code, your CI process, your build process, as well as your deployment process, etc. all positive things that can contribute to that being able to modernize a lot of your systems. And so with that, let's jump into a demo. So a lot of what we've talked about, like we really have talked about a range of technologies and projects. And really the topics and the principles we've talked about, you can plug in whatever tech stack that you have in your infrastructure and systems. We're going to jump into kind of an example within this DevOps architecture. I'm going to focus on a specific project. I'm going to focus in the CD space using Octopus Deploy. But again, a lot of the principles that I'll show are applicable to other tools that you can take away and apply now. But we want to see how we can modernize and deploy the new version of a legacy line of business application while trying to modernize it. And so we have kind of the old and new happening concurrently and how we can manage that. So I'm going to just jump out of here and I'm going to jump over to Octopus Deploy. So what I have set up here, this is a demo project. And so as part of a DevOps architecture, I have a lot of the elements that we've talked about. But thinking about how can we get started with application modernization and supporting that old and new and the transition. So we're looking at the Octopus Deploy dashboard here. And Octopus, if you haven't seen it before, it's focused on continuous delivery, being able to ship your applications through your environments. In this case, I've got the three categories. The names are a little bit different from the example. I have development, which is, again, that environment where it could be automated. We can run tests. Test environment could be test staging or UAT, where people are actually looking at things, and then production, which is our live system. But down the left-hand side here, I have a collection of applications, and then along the top, I can see again those environments. So I know what version of every application has been deployed where. So I just have an understanding. I've got that visibility into what I'm doing. If I jump into any of these deployments, I can see who deployed what, when, and what actually changed. But today we're going to dig into, or dive into, an order entry system. And so this is a typical line of business application where it's capturing orders and starting an order fulfillment process. So if I jump into this is where things get interesting. And so this is my project dashboard. And so this project has a matching Git repository. I'm using GitHub for my source control. I have GitHub Actions for my build. It's one of the more popular CI servers or CI processes nowadays. And then I'm pushing to Octopus for my deployment, and I'm deploying to Azure. But what we see here, this is a version controlled project. So I'm looking at the configure. I'll be looking at my deployments and the configuration of my CD process. And so we're focused on the strategies to be able to modernize this application as we move forward. Now, this project dashboard, I can see a series of releases down the left-hand side. And again, I can still see my environments, dev, test, and production here. But this is a version controlled project. And what I can see immediately is that I've got a mix of branches here. And so the very last one shows what's running in production. I have 2.1.088. And that's on the main branch. That would be kind of version 2. That's the production current version of the system. And then at the very top here, I've got a couple new releases that were created, again, triggered by my CI process, runs through all the CI elements, running unit tests, etc. But I'm modernizing, I'm testing, or I'm working out the kinks as the team is building version 3 of the application. And so in this case, we'll see the deployment process, but version 2 is like a desktop, a traditional desktop app that's going to desktops, whereas version 3 has a modernized front end, containerized front end, but it's still integrating with the legacy services because we need to innovate in that, enable our customers to add their orders more easily. But while this is happening, we've had a bug report come through. So you can see I've got a branch here, fix SQL update. So there was a backend bug. And so in this case, we deployed, we validated in a dev environment, we tested in a test environment, and that was deemed quality. So we merged the PR, and then we're back to main. So version 2.1.0.90 is the latest version of our legacy application. So while we're modernizing, we can still deploy the older version. So to see how everything works, I'm just going to jump into deploy here, and we're going to kick off with a production release. So this is a deployment summary screen. I just get to select my environment. I could schedule this if I wanted or customize things. But today I'm just going to kick things off, and we're going to go straight to production. So I've already gone through my environments, though, I will point out. And the other thing that I'll mention is that I'm running as an administrator. So I have full permission here, whereas typically the production deployments are limited to only those who should be, depending on your organization. So the first thing that we have is a production approval, and I'm a member of the group who can approve. So normally this would go through a more thorough process, but I'm going to say all tasks complete in change request approved. So I'm just going to proceed with this deployment, and it will now move forward. And so this is a traditional or almost legacy deployment. We're going to Windows servers and desktops. And so this is a summary where it's going to show me what's happening, but I also have detailed task logs that tell me everything that happens, and that's often important if there's ever a failure. So while this is deploying, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to my deployment process. And again, I'll go through this quickly, but this is my version 2, my main legacy deployment process. And so what you can see is I have my approval, I have a database update. This is a step that's deploying our older, like our legacy order service, a backend web service that processes orders, to web servers, one or more. And then we have a desktop application that is going out to multiple desktops for our customers. But what I have is I have the other branch, so I can switch to that. And what we can now see is that I've got similar steps. I still have my approval, my database update, but I've renamed this. That's our legacy order application. And I'm still deploying the desktop application. That's just to keep it around while we're moving forward. But I've added a Kubernetes deployment where we're rebuilding our front end. And so when we're ready, probably this would be an initial iteration, a modernizing front end, and then I'm able to deploy to the older system and also start moving forward with the new version of the application. And so if you've never seen Octopus, all these steps are added. It could be just scripts, standard scripts, through to more intelligent steps, like deploying to IIS or deploying a bicep template. We have a range of steps that are all provided out of the box. Kubernetes as well. We have a range of deployments options with Customize, Helm, etc. But if we take a look at how you configure one of these steps, you specify where a step is run. And this is an example of just creating a load balancer, a little snippet of YAML with support to update configuration settings that can be deployed through environments. And so what I'm doing here is I'm leveraging config as code with Octopus, and I have a matching CI build with GitHub Actions to enable me to iterate on my deployment process and application while maintaining the existing system. And so this process is one of the key parts of the release system. And the other one is capturing configuration settings that vary as you move through environments. One of the keys that Jeffrey said is we build once, you get those binaries created once, and then you promote that single artifact through your environments, dev, test, production, or dev staging, etc. And so here what I have captured is a range of configuration settings. One of the most common is just database connection strings. So as you move through environments, we capture and update your database connection string as you move through. But if we jump back to our deployment summary, what we can see our last production deployment was successful, and that release has successfully moved from our CI process through to our environments, dev, in this case, dev, test, and production. And we've moved that release successfully to production. And moving forward now, if once our more modern front end is ready to be promoted, it could be merged to main, and again, move through that same environment progression. And so with that, I'm just going to switch back to our slide deck. So we're close to time. I'll raise this and we'll open up for questions now. Jeffrey, did you have something to point out? Apologies.
No. While the questions are coming in, I wanted to just recognize something that's very common with all of the people that I've worked with that are new to Octopus Deploy or trying to automate the deployments for the first time. There, you showed the process, and there's so much there. We got to throw, of course, with the legacy stuff, we got to throw something to IIS, to SQL Server, now to Kubernetes, to Azure App Service, to Redis Cache, to Azure Container Apps, and there's so many different things that need to be configured in different ways, and the complexity is there for sure. But I think the magic sauce of doing it with Octopus is with the step templates. Octopus has categorized every environment type and all of the key ways to interact with that environment type in the step template library, and has made connectors and deployment steps for everything out there. And by categorizing all of the different elements of complexity, we can just say, I'll take one of those. I'll take a Kubernetes. I'll take an Azure SQL. I'll take an app service. And it just simplifies everything. Because, all those things, and then the daunting task of figuring out the right command line with the right command line switches and the exact way to call it, the way it wants to be called, that's just a lot of work. So that's a huge point that I just wanted to stress is all I got to do is select, yep, I'm putting this in Kubernetes, or I'm putting this in Azure SQL, and just list it out, and it works.
One of the benefits of Octopus is that the library, and we only looked at it quickly, but very much it's if you're getting started with deployments, starting and scripting it all yourself, it's very possible, and a lot of us have already done that. But there's times where if you can just use these building blocks to automate the process that you already have, and then tweak it as you need moving forward, it's a lot faster. So you don't have to maintain the scripts, which is a big benefit, and you can just focus on automating the parts that might be custom to your team or your organization. And so, yeah.
I did have a question that came in, and you touched on it briefly, but the question is, how do I deploy to environment 2 and environment 3? Do I repeat the process, or do I just change variables?
Where was the question? Sorry, apologies.
In the chat. It was in the chat.
Yep.
How does the promotion between dev, test, and prod work? Is it the same build script, but only with varied parameters?
Yes. So that's a fantastic question. And so in Octopus, this is something I didn't touch on too deeply, but one of the key concepts is you create a release in Octopus. And so that snapshots the package versions or container versions that you're going to deploy, as well as your deployment process and all of those variables or configuration settings that vary as you go through. So what you're getting as you deploy to dev, test, and production, you're actually executing that same process. The only thing that's changing is those configuration settings. And so we saw in one of the steps, I had it parameterized, and that was a snippet of YAML. But that's really the key, that under the hood, there are scripts that are doing this for you. A classic example is deploying to IIS or other platforms where the inputs are known and it's a standard process. You just provide the name of the variables or the configuration settings, and Octopus does that all for you. So it can update the configuration script or the deployment scripts, but also all your application configuration settings. And a lot of that's done by convention based on name, so you don't have to do much of the work. But yeah, so absolutely that very much it's parameterized to, again, maintain that build once, deploy many times.
Nice. And that's all we had. This has been fun.
This was excellent. So thank you so much, Jeffrey. Just move to the final point here. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Jeffrey, did you want to talk through the offer just on the last slide here?
Yeah, and we understand that the people on this webinar are really, really interested in automating deployments with Octopus Deploy. And so being the North American consulting partner with Octopus, one of the offers for anybody watching this webinar is a free 2 hours of consulting for this purpose. And so to take advantage of that, just go to the URL on the screen, and Johnny has also put that in the chat. But you can go to it and then gather some people in your team and kind of do it jointly to include them. But we're happy to provide that with one of our Octopus Deploy consultants at ClearMeasure, and hopefully push you down your path of DevOps automation.
And that's a fantastic offer to take advantage of. And so, yeah, this has been a wonderful session. I think thank you so much, Jeffrey. And I think this is a wonderful offer for anybody who wants to move on that app modernization and start implementing some of these strategies that we've talked about. So with that, I think we can say thank you and have a good day to everybody.
Indeed, this is fun. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.